I'm Bruce Apar, and you're watching Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog. Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog is brought to you by Chase Media Group, publisher of The New Penny Saver. And if you go to our website, nypennysaver.com, you'll find out what I mean by The New Penny Saver. And provider of multimedia marketing solutions for an omni-channel marketplace, as we like to say. And we always thank our CEO, Carla Chase, and my co-host, who is not with us for this show, Frank Rich, for putting us up every week. And Bruce the Blog, or Frank Talks with Bruce the Blog, when Frank is here, brings you really interesting people in the community and even beyond in the Hudson Valley region who are making, in many cases, unique contributions to our quality of life. And you can see all of our past shows if you go to YouTube and search for TownLink TV, or even search for Bruce the Blog. And you may not be watching this in 3D unless you have a 3D TV, but actually you don't need a 3D TV to see 3D on this show, and we're going to be talking about that for the next 30 minutes with Rob Caluori, Jr. of Westchester Library Systems. And Rob, your title is Director of Information Technology, and you have a very cool job these days because you get to work with, I don't want to say play with, it is your job, but I guess there's a certain play element in there, 3D printing, which must be one of the hottest buzzwords and certainly hottest topics going around these days, right? I mean, I just wanted to start off by asking you, and I think people will be surprised to hear this, how long 3D printing actually has been around.
That's right. Thanks for having me on, Bruce.
Sure.
It very much is an element of fun to this, but there is a lot of science and technology behind the technology, which has been around since 1984. It was first developed by 3D Systems, 3DS as it's commonly known, back in 1984. So it's nothing new. What's new is that it's come down to the level that we can now enjoy it at home and in our libraries and our community with these desktop model printers.
And that's another, I think, interesting question that somebody would naturally have, even somebody who doesn't know anything about technology, is, so what happened, since these have been around for now 30 years, what happened that now it was able to make the leap from being, let's say, an industrial technology to something that's available to basically anybody who wants to shell out about $1,000?
Sure. A lot has happened, mostly revolving around the open source community. People such as myself that have a passion for 3D technology and for do-it-yourself really set out with the newer technologies that are out there, things like the Arduino, which is a small-grade electronics prototyping platform where you can apply computer code to electronics, allows you to build machines like these at relatively low price points. And as the technology has evolved and developed, they've been able to actually bring this to market at the desktop level. Right.
Now, when computers, let's say, first came out, they weren't really user-friendly to the average person. Especially with DOS, and and you had to sort of know you had to know code actually. With the first personal computers, let's say. But how proficient does somebody have to be with technology to own and operate at home a 3D printer?
That's the great part about this technology, and how far computers have come to allow this to be accessible by the everyday person. If you're, a true professional and you know 3D design on the high-end 3D software, you can use this. If you're a 9-year-old and all you want to do is go online and use a simple website like Tinkercad to make a 3D design, you can still use this same printer. The width of users that can use this ranges greatly, and there are resources now available because of the power of our home computers. People don't realize how much power that home computer they have really has. Really can develop some great 3D designs with very little knowledge.
So in a certain way, this is like a 21st century erector set, or even Lego, or right?
Absolutely.
You're saying really a 9-year-old could use this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with parental supervision, of course,
Right.
because you're dealing with some risks here with as far as heat goes.
Right.
But a 9-year-old can make the designs all on their own using very, very simple tools, and have their dream machine, their modern Tinker toy, develop whatever they create.
Right, and actually make, speaking of, they could make their own Legos, because that's exactly the kind of, right, plastic object that this creates.
Their own building bricks.
Right.
Legos is a trademark name, but they can make building bricks.
Building bricks, yes. Right.
And they can make replacement Tinker toys, things
Right.
like that. I've seen everything from that to kids making their own custom board games. Taking existing board games and changing the rules and making new pieces.
Right.
And, custom chess sets and all kinds of really, creative inventions.
Right. And at the other end of the spectrum, in terms of highly functional, even not life-saving necessarily, but life-assisting products. When I first met you at the Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce monthly meeting, and you gave your presentation, which I could attest held everybody, totally rapt hearing about 3D printing. You mentioned a prosthetic hand, right? That was made with a 3D printer I think for a child, for a young person.
Yes, I was talking about the RoboHand project, which was developed using one of the innovations that only a 3D printer can bring, which is distributed engineering, where people in different locations that ordinarily would not be able to come together and work on a single project can now work on a single project. And the RoboHand project was an open source project that 3 people, a father with a child with a disability, he was born without a fully developed hand, an engineer here in America and an engineer in South Africa, they collaborated and they made this wonderful device that you could print on one of these printers for less than $20 worth of plastic, and it becomes a functional replacement prosthetic for a hand with fingers that move and are able to pick up and grip. It's amazing.
No, that really is amazing. And you mentioned, and we should explain for people, because it's not necessarily a household term, open source.
Sure.
And what that means. Yeah.
So open source only means this, that the people who created it, rather than patenting it and making you pay to use it.
And protecting the patent.
And protecting the patent. They give it away. They say, listen, here it is. Then there are several open source licenses that you can release your product with. One of the most common is the GNU license that basically says this. Here it is. You can use it for your purposes as you see fit, but you're not allowed to make a profit off of it. So here it is. It's our gift to the community.
Which actually, even in the world of intellectual property, whether it's literature or music or film, there is something called fair use, right? Where you can use a certain, and it is measurable. Like, I remember in literature or in journalism, let's say it's 100 whatever it is. I don't want to be held to it, but it's an X number of words you can use, without getting permission from the copyright holder. So it's really
exactly. It's
that.
an extension of fair use in a way. But what it allows you to do, it gives you a base. It's used in technology and computer technology all the time, where software will be developed by somebody. On its own, it really isn't something that you could bring to market and sell, but it can be used as the base for something much bigger. And so they put it out there for the community. And then the community can take it in, absorb it, use it just as a standalone, or use it to build something much greater that they can turn around and then sell. So.
No, and that's one of the elements of this technology, 3D printing, that fascinates me. And you can actually coin it, with the nomenclature community technology. And we were talking before the show about crowdsourcing, which is a word now that more and more people are hearing as it applies to journalism, where through social media, instead of calling, the old journalism, you call a source on the phone and interview them, and call another source, and get 3 sources is the rule of thumb in journalism to verify something. But with crowdsourcing, you go on social media and you just see what people are saying about a particular topic, and that obviously has a certain de facto validity to it, right? Because it's out there in the marketplace, and so you're sourcing from the crowd. And when I went, and we can mention websites here. When I went on the MakerBot website, you referred me to, one of the things that struck me was how, they have a platform there where they are actively soliciting and encouraging people to say, tell us what you're doing with our 3D printer.
Exactly. They operate another website called Thingiverse.com, and that's where all of the objects you see on the table in front of you actually were made from.
Right.
It's a social media site, just like with photo sharing sites or social media sites where people share their thoughts and ideas. Thingiverse is a site where people can go on and share the models that they've created in 3D on the various pieces of software, and they actually can note what kind of open source license they give it, and you can go ahead and download and use them according to that license. And we use them educationally here to teach librarians how to use the technology and for advocacy for the libraries. But all of these models, like this one right here, was designed by somebody else and then given away to the community.
Right. And that's just another example of the sharing culture that is evolving, right? Thanks to social media, and of course, I mean, for many, many years, I was in the consumer electronics industry on the media side, and one of the things that this is clearly going to do because of that whole crowdsourcing and sharing is how the end user discovers different applications is going to ultimately transform the hardware. It's going to transform this product and actually influence, right, the creation of new products.
Exactly. Yeah. And it already has. People are beginning to build their own 3D printers. In fact, it's where it all started, with people building their own 3D printers.
Right.
There are projects out there with goals such as, let's build a 3D printer that has the capacity to build more of itself. So there's a project out there like that where they intentionally build it to a certain scale so that it can build all of the parts that it's made from.
Isn't that like what is it with snakes that replicate themselves?
Exactly, exactly.
Well, really, that's
so you build your parent printer and then it produces multiple child printers all on its own.
Wow, that's...
With a couple pieces of machine bolts and washers and things like that. Of course, you have to go to Home Depot and buy. But other than that, the stuff you buy from a hardware store, all the plastic materials, all the support structures, all can be printed on the parent
printer. That's when 3D, what about a Freudian slip? When science fiction becomes science fact, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So now it won't be long before we see a Hollywood horror movie, where the 3D printer creates monsters that overtake the owner or something.
Well,
like
and that's a great topic.
Yeah.
Science fiction meets science fact.
Yeah.
For decades now, we've watched different iterations of Star Trek.
Yeah,
and in each of them, we've seen this object called a replicator, okay, where they said, I want a cup of water, or I want a piece of cake. We're getting there. This printer right here actually has modifications available where you can print in icing.
Right.
So
icing?
Icing,
for cake?
like cake icing, yeah.
Edible
icing.
Okay.
So we're not that far off from being able to have machines that produce almost anything we want.
Wow. And of course, at the top of the show, Rob, I said you are at the Westchester Library Systems. So, of course, we have to get to this angle or aspect of the show. What does this have to do with libraries?
Sure. As fun as it is, and it is a lot of fun, there is a real purpose here. When you're creating these 3D models, you're talking about engineering. You're engineering things like hinges and screws and threads and things like that. That's what kids are learning about in different areas of the STEM curriculum, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics curriculums. And being able to take what they're learning in that realm and transfer it into the modeling area where they can then model something that truly embraces scientific models or engineer something totally unique. It's so great to see it on the computer when you're done making it, but it's even better when you can then go somewhere and print it out. And while these printers are affordable at around $2,000 to $3,000 a pop, they're not affordable for everyone. Right. And just like 30 years ago, libraries had computers for people to publicly access, and later on they had printers for people to publicly access, and even more recently access to the internet for free. Libraries are hoping to be able to be the place in the community where people come to use this technology as well.
Right. No, that makes sense. Again, in my own experience with consumer electronics over the decades is that with very rare exceptions, anything that became a successful mass market item always started off at the industrial level, right? I mean, that's just the way, the product evolution progresses. At first, it's used only, let's say, in business applications, corporate use, industrial, and then it works its way down to the consumer market.
Exactly.
So one of my questions there is, I mean, if somebody was seeing this close up, and I think either we already did that or we're going to be doing that at some point in the show, getting a few seconds of close-up shots. It's very mechanical. I mean, it's a very mechanical machine. How, thinking about those of us who've been around long enough know how big computers were when they started off in the home, when they started off as home computers, and cell phones, how big they were. How small do you think this could actually get?
They can get actually pretty small. The only thing you're truly limited by is the size of the object you want to make. So this one, I would call this a medium-sized printer. There are printers that are
bigger,
a lot bigger than this. Commercially, there's ones that are bigger than this room.
Right.
But at the prosumer level, there are ones that are bigger than this and much smaller than this.
Right.
There are printers. I have one that I built, actually. It was a project that you build. That's only about this big. You can hold it in your hand and carry it from room to room. Right. And it prints an object that is 4 inches cubed. So you're only truly limited by the size of the object you want to create.
And the other aspect of this that readily comes to mind is how, we hear these days about how we're in a new economy and it's a much more entrepreneurial economy than it used to be. There's a lot more people who either out of necessity or out of desire want to be self-employed and have their own businesses. Well, I mean, this really opens up all kinds of opportunities, right, for somebody to have their own business.
Absolutely. If you're an inventor or you just have, you hear those commercials on TV all the time. If you're an inventor or have a way to improve an existing product, contact us. Well, here's your way to really flesh out that idea.
Right.
Another application of these printers is what's called rapid prototyping. You hear that term. It's been thrown around on a couple of popular TV shows.
Right.
Rapid prototyping, where rather than coming up with the concept for a product and then making a mold and sending it out to a molding facility, and then 3 weeks or 4 weeks later you get a piece of material back, and then you say, oh, I wish I could change this one thing. And it's another 4-week process. With this, you can make that design, print it out, and in a couple hours have it in your hand and then say, oh, I want to change that one little thing. It's not weeks. Your prototyping process goes down to days.
Right.
So you can very quickly develop a new product or an enhancement for a product.
Right. And there is locally, as we were talking about, our company, Chase Media Group, just happens to be based in Yorktown, even though the Penny Saver and everything else we do reaches, throughout the whole Hudson Valley region and sometimes across the country. But anyhow, in Yorktown, there is a new mom and pop shop. I mean, it's a storefront called Mini 3D Me that is selling miniature versions of you, basically, or a significant other or a loved one or whatever it may be. But the most obvious example they use is for the very familiar wedding cake.
Wedding cake toppers.
Toppers, right? Yeah. And so that's an example of a new retail business that opened up, strictly on the shoulders of 3D printing.
Yeah, it's an amazing technology. 3D scanning, rather than having to create that model from scratch in a digital space, you can start with an analog object such as ourselves, and with a 3D scanner, and there are many different kinds and based on different technologies, you can import the scan of any object, including a person, into 3D software. Clean it up a little bit if you want, make yourself skinnier, which is always great, and then you can print it out in 3D. It's really amazing stuff.
Of course, that reminds me of at least one Twilight Zone episode, one of my favorite ones with miniature people, but I won't go into that right now. And Rob, in terms of your own background, your business background and even personal background, what sort of led you to become the guru at the Westchester Library System of 3D printing?
Well, as the director of technology, and it's a great question, as the director of technology, part of my job is to investigate new technologies and discover if any applications there are to libraries. And about 6 or 8 months ago, I was asked to explore 3D printing technology and see, does this really have an application for libraries? Within a couple of weeks of investigation, it became very clear, yes, this does have an application for libraries. And as in coincidence, lots of libraries were asking me, I'm hearing a lot about this. What can we do with it?
Right.
And there's this great concept called maker spaces, where the public can come in and not just use a 3D printer, but use maybe a soldering station to create some electronics projects,
right,
or even use simple things like clay or any kind of molding material. But a space, an open space of a truly creative space for
right,
them to
yeah,
come in
right,
and explore really anything, creativity.
Well, and that in itself, what you're talking about, makerspace, if you think about it, what are libraries but, obviously storehouses of information and research, right? And so that's like 3D research, so to speak.
Right.
It's research in the third dimension.
We've always been intellectual makerspaces.
Right. Yes.
Now,
right.
now we're getting more into the physical realm. We did it in the past with paper, and now we're doing it with other things. And libraries are beginning to develop these maker spaces within their buildings for both children and adults to explore their creative outlets.
Yeah. No. And then something that's a great example of, as you say, how libraries are keeping up with the times and adapting to technology and really to society in general. And you should mention, again, because the show is seen in this region, which libraries, so people know if they happen to be near one and want to go see a 3D printer, which libraries in the Westchester Library System right now have 3D printers?
Right now, White Plains has a 3D printer, as well as the Portchester Rybrook Public Library, so the White Plains Public Library as well. Katona Public Library just got theirs yesterday, so look forward to that in next couple of days.
Wow.
We'll get that up and running. We'll get staff
just
training.
Just to locate it on the timeline, that would be mid-May for those of you who aren't sure when this show was recorded.
And right here in Peekskill, the Field Library will be getting theirs shortly as well. So.
And does it look like the other? How many other in the system?
There are 38.
38.
38 public libraries
wow.
in Westchester County.
And so, does it look to you from your vantage point that within maybe a year, all of the 38 might have them, or what do you see as the time?
I don't think it'll be a year,
No.
but within the foreseeable future, I think
Right.
a majority of libraries will have something along the lines of a 3D printer or a maker space or some kind of creative area where new technologies can be explored.
Now, if you go in to one of the, I don't know if every library in the system, I know they are independently operated.
Exactly.
But let's say the Hart Library in Yorktown, where I've been for the last 20 years, like or most libraries, you copy something, it's 10 cents. Is there a charge for using 3D printing? Or?
Every library is different, so they have that option to charge for it if they want. I imagine there would be.
Yeah.
Just like we pay for the
At least
paper
to
now
cover
to print.
costs and
Just
maintenance.
just
Yeah,
so to
right.
cover the cost of the materials, exactly. The other option, and some may explore this, is the ability to bring your own material and just use the printer so that
Right.
the library doesn't provide the material.
Right. Right. And I don't know, have we gotten a close-up yet of the machine? Yeah, okay. But we should also talk, Rob, about the plastic that's used, because people might be surprised what it looks like.
Sure. It's a filament. They call it plastic filament, and it's a 1.75 millimeter thick plastic line, basically. It looks like the line you use in your weed whacker, except
Right,
it's a
yeah,
very
right.
specific material, and it's manufactured to a very specific specification. It's got to be consistent through and through. You don't want it to clot or jam up in that print head at all. You want a nice continuous stream of plastic. And it comes in two significant forms. The first is ABS, and that's what we're using here today to print this object and what I have here on this spool. It's ABS plastic. It stands for ichronitile butadiene styrene. It's a fancy name of saying it's oil-based. It's a fancy way of saying it's oil-based plastic,
Right.
and it's very durable plastic.
Right.
It has a it has a flexibility to it. It can stand, a little bit of a wear and tear. It's what our car bumpers are mostly made out of.
Right.
The other kind of plastic is called PLA, polylactic acid. This is really wonderful material. It's made from a renewable source. It's made from plant starch, and it's also biodegradable. It starts to biodegrade in about 10 years.
Wow.
The difference between the two materials is that ABS is what's called an amorphous material. It never truly melts. It just gets softer and softer and softer,
Right.
which lends itself to 3D printing very, very well. The PLA is not. It liquefies just below the temperature we print it with.
Right.
So it comes out of the nozzle as a liquid, and it immediately gets cooled into a solid. So whenever you heat something to a liquid state and then cool it back down, it becomes brittle. And so the PLA materials that you print are brittle. And if your application requires a harder, less flexible material, then the PLA lends itself very good, well to that application. So you really have to pick the material to your application.
Right.
And they're both very readily available.
Right. So just like you're saying, whichever one is most appropriate. Now, one of the interesting and very topical ramifications of 3D printing is that it also could be made to use actually working guns, right?
Sure.
And I believe, is it on a state level that there's been legislation that's been going around, either in committee or actually passed, I think, in some states where it's against the law to use 3D printing to make guns, right?
I know certain states have passed laws, but there's also been action taken at a federal level, and it's very good that they're doing this. The federal government is actually pursuing those sharing sites that allow that kind of material on, because
I mean, where they actually tell you how to make a gun. With,
it's a violation because it allows somebody to produce a gun without a license, and you need to be licensed in order to make firearms in this country.
Right.
So they're pursuing that from getting the models off the street for the first point. The second point is, in a public space anyway, it's very easy to control. As you see here, we're printing one model, and this printer is going to be running for about an hour and a half to produce an object only this big. To produce a gun, you would need tens of hours of printing. And in a public space, we can control that very easily by, one, you can see the model on a computer before you print it. So library staff will obviously be looking for that and preventing any unnecessary printing of negative objects. The other thing is, I wouldn't want to fire a gun made with one of these printers. The material is...
it could actually literally backfire.
Oh, the situation could backfire on you drastically. The plastic is brittle, and it's layered, one layer at a time. So it's not a solid object in the sense that it was extruded in a solid form. It can break away.
Right. So just in any way, it's not a good idea.
It's not a good idea from top to bottom.
Really bad
in addition to being illegal, it's very unsafe.
Right, yeah. It's just as well. It should be. So as we're closing up, Rob, on the website of MakerBot, which is the most well-known brand, right, in the, as you say, prosumer space, I saw that the founder and the CEO of the company is comparing what's happening with 3D printing to how the iPhone changed our culture. I mean, do you see it that way too?
Oh, absolutely. The ability to take any thought you have and then have it physically be produced in front of you is so powerful. Things that we would have to used to search store to store, now we search online from site to site. Now, if you have that idea of that one thing you want that would make something exactly what you want it to be, your dreams can become a reality without having to go to anybody else but your den, wherever you keep your printer, and create that object.
Could you think of what would be the coolest thing you've seen that's been made by a 3D printer so far?
The coolest thing I've seen in person is actually a dock for that iPhone. Where you stick the iPhone in there and the speakers are at the bottom, and there's audio channels in there that direct the sound out of a horn. And it was the coolest thing. Rather than buying amplified speakers, you now have this ability to amplify the sound without any electronics. And you have a desktop radio out of your phone. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing. I mean, and that is a great example that epitomizes the inherent benefit of this. And one of my favorite phrases, quality of life. I mean, this makes really infinite contributions, right, into the future to our quality of life. So anyhow, we want to thank Rob Caluori, who's Director of Information Technology for the Westchester Library System, for hauling this 3D printer here on the set, which is really cool in its own way. And it's ready. You could really see that. It's just about finishing that little box, right? And I was looking at this hinged box, which I don't know. Yeah, you can't see it. Like it was a heart, and I'm playing.